Good evening and welcome to the Climate Change Risk and Resilience Forum. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the League of Women Voters of San Mateo County. I'm Margaret Lukens. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of North and Central San Mateo County. This session is part of a series on bay and coastal flooding and fire risk mitigation in our county. This series of meetings is co-sponsored with OneShoreline, the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District. The League of Women Voters is a 101-year-old nonpartisan political organization with a mission to empower voters and defend democracy. This series of countywide community discussions on the impacts of sea level rise and wildfires is part of our mission. These discussions focus on the potential effects of climate change throughout San Mateo County and potential solutions. Tonight's forum will focus on San Mateo County's Pacific coastline. We hope to inform and inspire more of our neighbors to become deeply engaged with these issues that affect us all. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Debbie Ruddock, Half Moon Bay Vice Mayor and OneShoreline Board Vice Chair, for some remarks. Debbie?
Good evening and welcome. I'm the Coastal Cities representative for San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District. These cities include Half Moon Bay, Pacifica, and Daly City. I've lived on the San Mateo coast side in Half Moon Bay with my family for more than 30 years and have served on city council for nearly 20 of those years. While the population of Half Moon Bay has grown only minimally, coastal erosion has changed the land dramatically, and the rate of erosion is increasing. A narrow gully my young children skipped across in 1990 is now nearly 50 feet wide, and a pedestrian bridge has needed to be replaced over that gully twice in less than 20 years to accommodate a wider and wider chasm. Condo developments in Miramar are at risk of retreat. The city is now developing a plan to move segments of the coastal trail out of harm's way in an area that has experienced erosion rates of 3 to 4 feet a year. Our sewer plant will need to be changed to accommodate rising seas and more powerful storm surge. The city and county will have to work together and are working together to address these issues because a good deal of infrastructure under threat is public infrastructure shared by the city and the unincorporated coast side. And because the threats and impacts of sea level rise, coastal erosion, more frequent coastal flooding know no boundaries. We will also have to work with Caltrans because of impacts to Highway 1 and with state parks, which owns and manages significant shoreline property. I'm reminded of a quote I heard Supervisor Horsley say at a recent league workshop. He said, "The most impactful work will be done together." And I think this is so whether we live on the bay side or coast side, even if the problems of occupying land along the open coast differ from those at the edge of the estuary. This is not to diminish the importance of localized impacts of flooding or erosion. You'll hear tonight from the city of Pacifica about catastrophic cliff erosion and threats to private as well as public infrastructure that need to be addressed. But a regional approach is needed to marshal and leverage financial and other resources to address threats on a multi-jurisdiction scale and to build a county-wide resource base to assist public agencies address those localized impacts. This is the mission and beauty of OneShoreline, to provide a unified vision and voice in the county for a climate resilient future for all 20 cities in the unincorporated county in the planning, securing of funding, and building in a way that will protect us, enhance our environment, and create recreational opportunities and other public benefits. I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this informative event, and thank you to our panelists for their participation. And I'll hand the mic over now to Supervisor Horsley's Chief of Staff, Chris Hunter.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Ruddock. I'm here representing my boss, Supervisor Don Horsley, who is on a well-deserved vacation and sends his regrets. The first thing I wanted to say is that his office and he personally has had the good fortune of working with almost everyone in this panel and the agencies involved. And so one of the things that I wanted to share with everyone is that Don was responsible for incorporating one of the mandates of the Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, and that is that the supervisor of District 3, no matter who that is in the future, will automatically have a seat on the board of the Resiliency District. That's how important Don believed it was for someone from the Board of Supervisors to have an investment and being a steward for the San Mateo County coastside. Some of the things that Supervisor Horsley has been responsible for in the past 11 years. Next year will be his 12th and final year as the county supervisor. One of the things was the repair of Highway 1 at Surfers Beach, north of Half Moon Bay. This was a complex project which incorporated emergency armoring and repair along with pedestrian access to the beach. The danger came within a few inches of washing out the Highway 1 there, was that the ocean would end the access up and down that part of the coast, created a disastrous situation that would require realigning the roadway through the El Granada neighborhood. This may end up being what happens, but it didn't happen recently. And there'll be other people talking about the future of sea level rise. Another instance was mentioned is the Marauder Road commercial and residential area and Marauder Road pedestrian bridge, where the coastal trail goes across. Both of these required cooperation with the California Coastal Commission, and both were spearheaded by Supervisor Horsley, and both are permitted and paid for and in progress. And this is another example of the collaboration that county and city and state agencies can actually get things done. Flooding in Pescadero is a crucial challenge. It's been an ongoing problem for decades, long before people were speaking about sea level rise. Through Don's efforts and the Resource Conservation District, the Buteno Marsh Creek has been widened, and the district has been able to manage this world-class environmental project. People long believed it would never happen. The Pescadero Fire Station is in a floodplain in Pescadero. This will be moved to the Pescadero High School location, along with a major freshwater extension to the school and the fire department from the CSA 11 water system. This is also a long-term solution problem. This is a long-term problem that is being solved. And I personally live in Pacifica. I've been here for 30 years, so I've watched the erosion of the bluffs for a long time. And as the publisher, editor, and publisher of the Pacifica Tribune, I documented a lot of it throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. The irony of Pacifica's challenge in sea level rise is that the answer has been to armor the coast and get special emergency permission to continue to armor and protect the residential and commercial areas. The county is doing the same thing on Marauder Road, for example. This has created this history of armoring in Pacifica, and I'm sure that Ryan will have a lot more to talk about the challenges there. We are all facing something that is coming at us like a freight train, and I would like to pass along this evening to Len Materman, who is the CEO of the Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District. And thank you all for coming, and I appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. I have a few slides to share to give an overview of the new district and what we've been working on the bay side and on the coast side, and then I'll turn it over to our colleagues here on the panel. So here we go. So this is the final of 6 forums, the last 5 of which were focused on different areas of the county, and one county-wide focused on wildfire. And we're very pleased at how this has gone, and thank the League for their participation in this program, and all of the panelists and all of the people that are attending. We really appreciate it. So to give folks a context of sea level rise, this is on the bay side. A similar story can be written on the coast side. Over the last 125 years, the water level has risen. Sea level rise is not a future thing. It's been going on, and it's risen at about a rate of about 1 inch every 15 years. And the mid-range estimates of sea level rise, so not the most extreme, but the mid-range estimates call for a rise of about, instead of 1 inch every 15 years, 1 inch every 2 years. So we're very likely to see quite a bit of acceleration in sea level rise in the coming decades, the rest of the century. And this, of course, creates a lot of anxiety, not just on sea level rise, but on all the other issues associated with climate change. And one of the things that we try to do through these forums and through our work is to impress upon people that there is an organization now that's thinking about this full time, and we're focused on building resilience for the county to try to reduce some of that anxiety and the feeling that this is not something that we can make a dent in. So the San Mateo County, as was mentioned before, has a lot of vulnerability to this issue. Because we have both the bay and the coast side, we're particularly vulnerable with like a few other counties. But in California, we're pretty unique in terms of the first 3 feet of sea level rise. There's more impact to the number of people, including underrepresented populations, low income populations, the property value, the number of homes, the number of contamination sites. These are all the most vulnerable county in California. They're all here. And we're only one of 6 counties in the whole country, and the only one on the West Coast with over 100,000 people to be impacted by the first 3 feet of sea level rise. Of course, there are many assets at risk, including the great beaches on the coast side, was mentioned before, water treatment plants on both the coast side and the bay side, as well as natural areas, and of course, schools and hospitals and private industry. So with so many, with knowing that vulnerability, and with so many cities on the bay side, there are 12 of them in San Mateo County, and with so few cities, as mentioned, Daly City, Pacifica, and Half Moon Bay on the coast side, for both areas, it was really clear that it was impossible for the cities alone to take on this really transformative issue for the county, and that they needed to work together. And as our Vice Chair Ruddock, Debbie Ruddock mentioned, that's kind of one of the great things about our agency, is that we try to bring together multiple jurisdictions in all of the work we do. And I'll give some examples of that. There had been a longstanding flood control district that was part of the county, but it only worked in 10% of the areas of the county and on none of the coast side. And so as Chris Hunter mentioned, it was important that the coast side be represented, both on our board through Debbie Ruddock and through Don Horsley at the moment, and also in all of our work. And so it was felt that the longstanding county district was not up to the task of this issue for the whole county. So what we do is we think about resilience in terms of how we can address it holistically. The threats, we don't just look at the traditional 100-year storm and the historic rates of erosion, but we think about what the future conditions will be like, and what type of storms climate change will bring, and of course, what level of sea level rise will be there. And our assumptions about sea level rise are that they are substantial, they will be substantial, and that we should address that future condition. We take a holistic view of the geography, as I mentioned, looking at multiple jurisdictions and how we can align and connect protection for them, and then a holistic view of the objectives of our project, not just to reduce the threats, but also looking at turning shorelines from liabilities into assets, and integrating water and open space and recreational assets into communities, and utilizing private lands as well as public lands. So we were created in January 1, 2020, with startup funding from the county and all the 20 cities within the county. Our priorities for this year include completing our first construction project, which will protect 5 mobile home parks from frequent flooding. It's on the bay side between Menlo Park and Redwood City. We're advancing new multi-jurisdictional projects. I'll give an example of one of those, working with cities and developers in order to have the planning of our cities and our unincorporated areas align with what the future conditions will look like, and not just plan for the current conditions. And then developing a long-term stable source of funding for climate resilience work, both on the water side, but also on the wildfire side. Here's a snapshot. I won't go through all of these projects, but just to give folks a sense of the different projects we're involved with. 4 of them were the lead agency. The one under construction is in the bottom right. I mentioned the Bayfront Canal Atherton Channel project. We're also looking at design and developing environmental documents on 2 very large projects, about 8 miles of shoreline in Redwood Shores and a similar length of shoreline in Burlingame and Millbrae connecting into SFO. And then on the coast side, we've had discussions with Pacifica. We've been supportive of their need to move forward with work to establish resilience, as Chris mentioned. And we're also looking at a project at Pillar Point Harbor, and I'll dive into that for just a second. The image at the upper left shows Pillar Point Harbor area in 1956, prior to construction of major elements on the shoreline, and it really was a kind of a half moon bay structure, or kind of contour to it. And the image on the right shows it today. And as you can see, kind of the wave action moving in towards where it says Highway 1, and this is Surfers Beach. And of course, you don't see that inside the harbor naturally, because there are these outer breakwaters that were built 60 years ago. And each of the entities mentioned here, the state, the harbor district, the county, federal, they've looked at understandably at their assets and how to protect and enhance those assets. And we at the district are starting to take a broader view of all of the assets and all of the layers of government, and how they interact together, and how the breakwaters kind of impact the whole area. And that includes the area of Princeton, which is county land, the state beach, and the state highway that Debbie Ruddock mentioned, as well as, of course, the important harbor that's in the middle of this area. So we're going to be taking a look at what are the long-term scenarios for this area, so that we can propose a solution for all of these different entities at the same time. Of course, along the coast, there are many examples, as was mentioned, of erosion threatening or impacting or resulting in condemnation of particular private properties, and that these properties, were built at a time where they may have been far from the edge, maybe not, but it's not an issue that's unique to the coast side. On the bay side, we have very recent developments that have occurred right along the shoreline. And what we're about is thinking through kind of the development process and talking with cities now about their general plans, coastal plans, specific plans, and zoning ordinances, so that together with our projects, we can build collective resilience to future conditions. If you look at the picture here on the lower picture on the right, you can see that it's not planned for sea level rise, and that really the only way when the water starts overtopping this walkway is to build a big wall right in front of these front doors, literally less than 10 feet from the windows and the front doors on the first floor. And what we want to do is encourage planning that kind of thinks ahead to these future conditions, so that we don't have to go and retrofit afterwards. So we're working right now with the city of Burlingame on developed a map of future conditions for the city. And what we're looking towards working with Burlingame is that the first zoning ordinances actually in the Bay Area to accommodate sea level rise will be in place in Burlingame by the end of this year. And we're excited about that. Just north of Burlingame is San Francisco Airport. Here's an example of a major project that we're working on. SFO has a shoreline protection project. And all of these colored lines around SFO indicate areas where it plans to build a shoreline protection. This bright blue dashed line is a very long distance along Highway 101 that most of you are probably familiar with. SFO is a pretty long stretch along the highway. It doesn't actually have to build that if it ties in through this yellow dashed line to communities to the south and to the north. And meanwhile, the city of Burlingame is looked at in 2019, its adaptation vulnerability and adaptation strategies, Similarly, the city of Millbrae did. And both of those cities came to OneShoreline after we were created in 2020 to bring together a cohesive plan that looks at the connection to SFO and then builds a project. And we were fortunate with the help of Kevin Mullen to get a state appropriation to conduct the planning, design, and CEQA documentation on this project, which is a massive project that is a great kind of starting point for our district. Then finally, we are working on early warning systems and emergency action plans. I won't go through all of this, but just to say that on the coast side, in particular, we're working with the RCD and utilizing state funding and county funding to analyze, and then we're planning to install gauges within the Pescadero and Butano watersheds to establish an early warning system down there, as we have in other parts of the county. So this is how to get in touch with us. And thank you. And I'm pleased to turn it over now to Ryan Marquez with the City of Pacifica.
Thanks, Len. Just wanted to thank everyone for the invitation this evening. My name is Ryan Marquez. I'm an engineer with the City of Pacifica. This evening, I would like to go over one of the city's most pressing sea level rise projects. Apologies for trying to figure out this Zoom control. That's right. So the City of Pacifica has 6 miles of coastline surrounded by mountains on the south and the east, of course. And we have numerous sea level rise and erosion related projects. Specifically, they're more concentrated in the north part of the town. In particular project I wanted to highlight this evening that is pressing for the City of Pacifica is the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project. That is located in the West Sharp Park neighborhood near the Pacifica Municipal Pier, as well as the Sharp Park Golf Course. So just a bit of background, the area, the two seawalls in the area, the north wall and the south wall, were built in the 1980s. The Pacifica Pier was built in the 70s to serve as effluent from the then treatment plant that was located in the vicinity. Since the construction of the walls, there's been multiple failures along the north wall with increasing damage and frequency in more recent times. Combined with localized flooding as well as wave overtopping, as you can see in the photo from the bottom right, and then combined again with the sea level rise outlook, the city found it prudent to begin planning for this, this vulnerable section of the coastline. So the goals of the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project are to replace the current seawall and outdated infrastructure in the area, to build climate resilience into one of the more vulnerable segments of the city's shoreline, to improve public access and the use of Beach Boulevard and the promenade, and ultimately to create a multi-benefit solution to protect public infrastructure, recreational activities, homes, businesses, and the community at large from further coastal erosion impacts. So we are now through with the first phase of this project, which was the planning and feasibility phase of work. Under this phase of work, we considered many alternatives. The 6 that were deeply considered and analyzed within this first phase were first a no project alternative, where the infrastructure, including the seawall and road, were removed and natural erosion were allowed to progress. The second was a beach nourishment scheme where cobble and sand would be brought in to help attenuate the wave action. The third alternative was a more robust seawall that would be able to accommodate sea level rise and increased wave run-up that's projected into the future. The fourth alternative was a rock revetment structure. So there is currently a rock revetment there. However, this alternative is a more robust structure of rocks. The fifth alternative that was considered is a beach nourishment scheme with sand retention. And so that could include groins or breakwaters to retain the sand that was brought in, and that would reduce the needed frequency for beach renourishments. And the final alternative that was considered under the alternative analysis for the project was a hybrid approach that included a seawall along with a smaller rock scour apron, as well as a smaller scale beach nourishment scheme. So over the course of the project, there was a series of public engagement that informed what was important to this project from the public, as well as professional input that went into creating a rubric that was customized for this project that looked at the technical performance of these alternatives, the financial and environmental impacts of them. And each of these criteria were broken down further and then graded by a group of professionals from with experience from environmental science to construction planning to coastal engineering. And the ultimate grading and the preferred alternative that was recommended by the city's consultants, city staff, was the hybrid alternative that looked to install a more robust seawall, a smaller scale rock scoured apron that would be buried by cobble as well as sand that would bring back some environmental benefits and recreational benefits to the area. If you'd like to know more about this project, I know I only had a few minutes to discuss it. There's a ton of information on the city's website at cityofpacifica.org/beach resiliency. My email is on the screen if you have any follow-up questions after this. And with that, I am passing it over to Jim Pruett. Thank you.
Again, I'm Jim Pruett. I'm with the San Mateo County Harbor District. I'm the general manager. I've been here for 2 years, and the Harbor District is doing some fantastic work. There we go. Good evening again, and thank you to the OneShoreline and the Sea Level Rise Resiliency District and the League of Women Voters for hosting this tonight and providing me an opportunity to discuss the San Mateo County Harbor District and the great work we are doing to improve facilities to address sea level rise. It's a very exciting time here at the district. Through the leadership and guidance of the Harbor Board, we have several of our capital improvement projects coming to a point where we'll be breaking ground. This includes the Surfers Beach Restoration Project, public restroom and green space improvement project at the RV lot at Surfers Beach, West Trail Living Shoreline Project, ADA restroom facilities at Tenant Row, replacements of docks at Oyster Point Marina, and the replacement of the entrance navigations at Oyster Point Marina. Again, that's in South San Francisco, and those projects just outlined are both approved by the board and funded by the board. So we're moving forward and breaking ground on those. And I'll talk about a few more of those shortly. Other capital improvement projects that are approved by the board but do not have approved funding will be going before the board on October 20th for funding approval. Funding approval is being recommended by the Revenue and Income Ad Hoc Committee. So that'll be next week. Johnson Pier reconfiguration and engineering design, Pillar Point Harbor launch ramp, restroom and boat wash, Oyster Point Marina West Basin access ramp, Pillar Point Harbor's replacement of design and engineering of GF&E floating docks, Pillar Point habitat restoration, sign and wayfinding, Pillar Point Harbor fuel dock replacement, the purchase of an administrative building, shoreline rock slope protection, Pillar Point parking lot improvements, Pillar Point coastal trail improvements, and then also a 40,000 square foot commercial building at Oyster Point Marina. Of all those projects I just mentioned, 6 of them are specifically related to sea level rise or will address sea level rise issues. And that includes the replacements of docks 12, 13, and 14 at Oyster Point, which will address the access ramps, West Trail Living Shoreline Project, Surfers Beach restroom and green space improvements, the Surfers Beach Restoration Project, Harbor Dredge and eelgrass mitigation, shoreline rock slope protection in Pillar Point, and then the Oyster Point Marina West Basin access ramps for docks 1 through 6. This is a picture of the East Basin at Oyster Point Marina in South San Francisco. All 3 of those gangways, as noted in the slide, with sea level rise, will flood in the future and prevent access to those docks. So we are addressing those as we replace those docks in the next coming months. That project is moving forward, and we should be breaking ground on that within the next couple of months. Same thing with the launch ramp there with the circle. We need to address that. We're working with the city of San Francisco, South San Francisco with that. And then the boat launch or the breakwater. We're also working on that. This is a stormy day with high tide, water breaking over the breakwater and flooding the dock there, almost flooding that dock within a couple inches. But also the slope is getting eroded away due to this action. So we're addressing all that when we replace these docks in the next couple of months, which is great news. Also at Oyster Point in the West Basin, or docks 1 through 6, those ramps currently flood now during king tides, and we need to raise those docks. And then the spit itself, the entire spit floods during king tides, preventing access to docks 8 and 7. The city of South San Francisco currently has a study on the spit to raise it and provide access to those docks. And we're working collaboratively with the city on that project. This is a picture of the spit currently at when king tides come in. Again, it's flooded out 6 to 12 inches. It's also settled about 3 feet. And then these pictures are the dock landings at king tide. You can see the water just flows up and floods the entire region. And then here's two. And then also prevents access to safety equipment, floods electrical panels. So we're addressing all that through a project of raising all those access ramps to meet the new grade of the Oyster Point development. So we're looking forward to that too. And again, that we decide funding for that project is going before the board on October 20th. Moving over to West Pillar Point Harbor, the West Trail. The West Trail goes from basically the West Trail parking lot out to Mavericks Beach. It is eroded to the point where emergency vehicles have a very difficult time to get out there for rescues or fighting fires, which they've had to do both recently in the last year. We have a project to replace the image on the left where it's you see rock and no beach at all, to the image on the right where you see a natural beach again, where we restoring natural habitat, creating a berm, and that is the intent of that is if you walk on the West Trail, you can't notice that we did the work. It's supposed to look natural. And we'll be removing a lot of the invasive plants and putting native plants in there. So we're looking forward to that. And the great news is I just signed our portion of the CDP from the Coastal Commission to move this project forward. And we should be breaking ground on this project within the next 5 to 6 weeks. And we're looking excited for this. This project has statewide interest as a fix for other communities to see how it works and how it retains its sand. So we'll be watching it closely along with several other agencies in California. The Surfers Beach Restroom and Green Space Improvement Project, as indicated in this figure, you can see the green space there, several ADA parking spots. Some trailer parking at the RV lot have been converted to parking spaces, including electric vehicle charging stations. The whole project will be designed so that when the waves get big enough to break over, it won't damage any of the buildings. They'll be designed so the water will flush through. And then it also provide a new coastal trail through that area to better resist sea level rise issues as they go around the coastal trail that goes into Pillar Point Harbor. So we're looking forward to that project also and working collaboratively right now with the city of Half Moon Bay to get all the final touches on it before we break ground on that. But I expect to break ground on that project in the early 2022 year. So great efforts. One of the biggest projects we have, and in working collaboration with the most agencies, is the Surfer Beach Restoration Project. The Surfers Beach Restoration Project will take clean sand that washed into the harbor from the west, or from the north, excuse me, towards Maverick Beach into the harbor and continue its progression south onto Surfers Beach. Right now, the sand gets washed into the harbor and gets stuck, and the depth of the harbor becomes unnavigable for some of the boats, causing a navigation hazard. But more importantly, for Surfers Beach, it stops the sand from going down the southern beach, Surfers Beach and south. So our project is, again, it's groundbreaking. We had to work with the National Marine Sanctuary to be able to put dredge material in the Marine Sanctuary, which we have all those approvals, and we'll be doing that. With this project comes with a significant eelgrass mitigation program, because the harbor depth came so shallow that we have eelgrass growing now in place we never grew before. So we need to mitigate all that. And then also the dredge of the harbor. So multiple benefits from this project. And hopefully at the end of next year or a little further, we'll be able to see sand there instead of just rocks. And we're looking forward to that. And again, working with City of South San Francisco, Coastal Commission, and several other agencies to make this happen. We hope to start the eelgrass mitigation in this spring during its growth period. And then the rest, the dredging and then placing it on Surfers Beach will follow naturally after that project is completed. So again, another great project, and the sand will serve as a protection for Highway 1 and the coastal trail in that region. And the sand, of course, will continue south down the beach naturally as it does towards Miramar and beyond. Inside the harbor, this is inside the inner harbor. We just recently had a survey conducted by an engineering firm, and they determined that this shoreline starting to erode, and the rock revetment is failing. So this is to the west of Johnson Pier. So our plan is to come in here and repair all this revetment, and then also enhance the coastal trail that runs to the harbor right above this for the future. So again, a great project, both for protecting the harbor from sea level rise and then also protecting the coastal trail and making it safer for everybody who uses that coastal trail through Pillar Point Harbor. We're using the Pillar Point sea level rise vulnerability assessment that was conducted by Moffitt and Nickel published May 3rd, 2018. The colors here aren't that important. They're just different reaches for the study that show the study started all the way out at Mavericks Beach and goes all the way back around to Half Moon Bay, with the harbor being in the center. And then this is a vulnerability assessment that we're working off of. You'll notice the saltwater marsh with sea level rise is completely flooded. Princeton by the sea has a lot of flooding issues. But for the harbor itself, we'll lose part of our parking lot there on the west side of the inner harbor. And then also where the kayak rental shop, that's a little bit lower, we might lose some of that to the sea level rise if no actions are taken. Beyond, and then I think that's my last slide. And I did this quickly so we can get to the question and answers, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at that time. Right now, I would like to pass it to our partners over at Half Moon Bay with John Doughty.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Really appreciate it. My name is John Doughty. I'm with the City of Half Moon Bay. I'm the Public Works Director. And we're thrilled to be talking about this, although I think like all of the folks in this room tonight, or virtual or otherwise, would appreciate that if we weren't here having to talk about this, but that's not a choice we all have. So tonight, I want to share some of the challenges and opportunities that we have with the city. Mine's going to be a little different, although I can talk about some of the project work that we're working through and dealing with it, but we're primarily really going to focus on sort of the issues and opportunities and challenges out there. And those will be for today and in the coming years as well. And while we do have private properties and that are at risk, our focus tonight, and my focus tonight, is really to talk about public infrastructure, utilities, and public spaces, and the threats that sea level rise, climate change, and the like are posing. And so with that, I will kick forward here, I think. Let's see here. There we go. So I won't go into great detail except to say that Half Moon Bay is a unique city just in terms of its configuration. We have about 7 miles of coastline, 7.5 miles of coastline, and we are a very narrow place. So everything, every piece of a bit of water that drains from the mountains, which are very close, run through us, and there's very little area for that. So what I will say is that the challenge I think we all face along the coast side is not only from the frontal attack of the Pacific Ocean, but also the issues of runoff, changing and runoff from climate change, fire potentials, which could also have major impacts in terms of mudslides and activities down the road. But also just that issue of how do we deal with stormwater coming off in the limited areas that we have. So it's not only the issue of sea level rise that we're facing and addressing. So Surfers Beach is the issue du jour for many of us. My perspective is a little different on this, and in 2017, the county, the city, and Caltrans partnered to basically reopen the trail and to do some work here at the beach. And you'll see here the stairway that was put in with that. And I think you'll notice down there at this point, even though you actually have a little bit of sand around there, the lower stair point is in water. And frankly, this stairwell already in less than 4 years of time is in need of some major maintenance, and already is a challenge, frankly, because there's a jurisdictional issue. Caltrans built it, was permitted, but there's a conversation among the reaches that say the Caltrans says the county is responsible for this. So I point this out not to point fingers or blame, but the issue is that when we start talking about infrastructure, we have to be talking about long-term maintenance obligations, funding that long-term maintenance obligations, and identifying who is responsible for the long-term maintenance of these. The other thing that I would point out that the others have not really talked to in great detail is the issue that when this project was approved, it was approved as an emergency or as a limited term project. And basically, this is supposed to be removed and something else done in a time certain. And one of the issues is that Caltrans was also supposed to be reviewing and preparing a study to look at realignment of where Highway 1 could go. My concerns follow around with plans for development of the park area and all those things in Granada, that we need to be coordinating with those things. So I point that out only that Highway 1 is a very important place and access for all of us to get away from fires, to get away from tsunamis, and to basically do commerce, and for our visitors to come and enjoy the world. So Highway 1 is a critical piece of infrastructure that we really need to be concerned about. Miramar Beach, interestingly enough, basically almost what you're looking at is all in the county, except that if you look just to the right of the big riprap wall area, the sand in this instance, because it's the time of year, is basically located within the city of Half Moon Bay city limits. So it's interesting with sea level rise and the changes that occurred there. We used to actually have part of the road. The road has deteriorated, dissipated. The rock riprap has been put in, and so now we have no road. It's only county road what exists. But importantly about the road is one thing, obviously historic Miramar restaurant, which I hope many of you, if not all of you, have been to. But this also represents the coastal trail in this location. So this is a critical link for the coastal trail and something that we have to protect. And I know the county has been working for many, many, many years, frankly, on plans and work to try to improve Miramar Road itself and issues. And then we come to the other side of that, which is the bridge over the Arroyo de Medio, and then looking a little bit further to the south. And this is an area where we had major slope failure and area with this. This happens to be also affecting private properties, a townhouse Debbie alluded to a little bit. And as Supervisor Horsley's aide mentioned, the county and the city have been working on trying to ensure that this bridge is replaced. And you can see it today, it's closed, and we have issues with the detour, and we're hoping within the next year or so that that bridge gets replaced. But you can see where the orange barricades are. This is the coastal trail as well. So all of that has been pushed, and we have this significant challenge, and that conceivably and foreseeably is not going to improve. And recently, within the last year, the Coastal Commission denied improvements in a wall here that would have provided access. So there's litigation. So this is just a harbinger of what's to come, I fear, with where private development is, and frankly, even where public development is proposing and trying to balance between Coastal Act and Coastal Commission and staff desires versus trying to preserve and protect assets, public and private, frankly, down the road. And those are going to be some very significant challenges and issues to deal with. And then we have the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side, which is operated as a joint powers authority, which the city belongs to. This was at one point a smaller city treatment plant. It was formed out as a JPA and has since been expanded. This is subject to, based on the county's sea level rise assessment, is subject to potential sea level rise flooding. And notably, one of the greatest parts is over here in this vicinity. Here is the electrical system for the entire plant, which is below grade. And so it will be the first to be flooded out in the event of a combination of flooding, sea level rise, king tide, whatever you want to mix there down the road. And so one of the initial projects that we're really looking at as the JPA at the plant down the road is actually at least raising up electrical. But this puts at risk the entire plant, and obviously out roughly in this vicinity here is the outfall to the ocean. And clearly there are issues and challenges that the state legislature is pushing along with the ultimate removal of those, which challenges us even greater to look at how do you and where do you store water for recycled water if you don't have the outfall. So, and we're this close to the ocean, and many issues, many challenges. Poplar Beach, Blufftop Park, or what most people call Poplar Beach. Very important, critical community and regional asset for this area. It is the city's only actual parked and accessible beach that we call our beach. This is significant. And you can see that on some of these pictures that we have significant erosion issues. Last year during COVID shutdown, we were able to make great improvements for the access, but this was done as an interim, temporary, or short-term to interim improvement. We know that erosion's occurring. We've done study of this with Nichols Consulting. And one of the things that we're working here with, and one of the major projects is we call Poplar Gateways Plan. We are in the process of developing the environmental impact report. The plan is basically done, and that plan is designed around addressing adaptation strategies, which will be to move our the coastal trail inland, away from the erosion, to try to cut off the access that's basically killing this part of the bluff, and to restore that area, and to basically live with and deal with the inevitable issues of sea level rise, erosion. I will point out, this is one of those interesting issues for us, which the study found something that we were not fully contemplating, that our erosion issues are 2 times that from the easterly side than they are from actually sea level rise. So this is where this public infrastructure is being squeezed from both sides, which is runoff from the hills and from urban development to the east, and also impacted by human activity compacting the soil, followed by additional impacts from the seaside, from the ocean side. So this is a significant challenge. We have a grant application in pending with Department of Boating and Waterways. We'll continue to look for grants, and we hope that we can collaborate with the OneShoreline as well toward this. And then we have, I think Councilmember Ruddock was discussing this, the Seymour Ditch, which used to be just a little creek, a little area there, and it is now incised, and we have cut through the clay lens there and have been incising, and just out of the picture, but in this picture, oh, sorry, back. Anyway, we built a bridge a few years ago that is now, because of some of issues there, threatened. This part of the coastal trail as well. Redondo Beach is to the south, and it's a smaller and lesser known area, but it is significantly impacted here. There are a number of people that go to the end of Redondo Beach Road and to access, and if you can look up in the corner up there, there's folks getting their stuff ready to go down, and they are apparently going to rappel down there. And frankly, it's amazing that people actually go down this mess here and go down to the sea and the beach. And so we're working with Coastside Land Trust and trying to develop with them, and hopefully they will find their funding to look at a safer access to the beach, and also connecting the coastal trail there. And then finally, we get down to the Ritz-Carlton or Ocean Colony side of the world, on the very south end of the city. I will say this: the economic aspects of the Ritz-Carlton cannot be overstated for the city. Transient occupancy tax basically is a significant fund for us, and the Ritz-Carlton is a significant contributor to that. The Ocean Colony golf course, 2 golf courses there, also is a contributor to our tax base, but more importantly to the overall basically visitor community and visitor experience for all of the coast sides. So these are major issues. A lot of businesses come, a lot of weddings, a lot of things, and those ultimately end up in greater aspects and benefits to the rest. And I will finish in that regard with some of you have been around here a while and understand that the Ritz-Carlton started to be built, or the hotel, wasn't the Ritz, I believe at that point, was started to be built closer to the ocean. And up to the top corner and the top pieces there are some of the pilings that were poured, concrete pilings that were poured for the original location of the hotel. You can see, and this is a few years ago now, that they had to come in. We had to remove these. We had a whole spider web of these old pilings, and those are removed, craned on the beach and accessed and everything with that deal. But it's still pretty scary. There are more of those that will continue to be unearthed and will have to be dealt with. But you can also see what would have happened had the Ritz-Carlton been actually located where it originally was planned to be and started to be constructed at. So a little bit of a shocking experience. So my basic quick conclusions: hey, we have critical infrastructure and utilities and public spaces across and down the coast that are at risk, and the enemy is at our gate. We're going to have to look at coordinated regional actions and funding, statewide, national, federal, whatever you want to call it. Everybody's going to have to jump into this, and the Coastal Commission is going to have to be an active partner, both in policy and in permitting. And that's a little I know we have BCDC on the Bay side, but the Coastal Commission is an entirely different beast, and the Coastal Act is a whole other issue. My final thoughts on this is the beaches and the open space of Half Moon Bay basically are statewide and countywide resource. And think of it this way: we are your front yard of the peninsula and beyond. And as we continue to increase densities, increase people across the hills into the peninsula, there will be a continuing demand for these open spaces over time. And so we really are going to have to protect those and deal with those. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Carolyn Bloede. I'm the director of the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability, and excited to be here for this important discussion, and also to see all these presentations of projects underway. So that's really encouraging. I'm going to give a short presentation on a study we have underway on the sea level rise of impacts on the South Coast. So that's from the southern part of Half Moon Bay down to the Santa Cruz County line. And this builds on a countywide sea level rise vulnerability assessment completed back in 2018. And that included the bay side of San Mateo County and then the rest of the coastal cities in the county. So if you're interested in learning more about sea level rise in Pacifica, Half Moon Bay, and other coastal cities, I'll be sharing a link at the end that will take you to that assessment. So this study focuses on the South Coast. As I said, it includes areas you all know: Pescadero, Tenitas Creek, Bean Hollow, Pigeon Point Lighthouse. And much like the study that we did in 2018, we're analyzing sea level rise vulnerabilities of communities and county facilities, beaches, agricultural lands. So we can really identify solutions to prepare for those climate impacts from sea level rise. We're working in collaboration with the USGS and Integral Consulting to develop maps of these areas that will be affected by flooding and erosion. Also working with scientists, agencies, community members to collect the data on the risks to buildings, farms, and roads. We've recently completed the data analysis. We've held a virtual public meeting last July to share the results of the risk assessment with South Coast communities. This was done in partnership with San Mateo County Resource Conservation District, and they're providing outreach support on this project. So what did we learn? The studies show the impacts at different levels of sea level rise. And I'm going to share with you the scenario of potential risks with 5 feet of sea level rise. And that's projected to occur by the end of the century. But this scenario really points us to the areas of greatest vulnerability. And we see the greatest types of risks from cliff erosion. We've heard a little bit about that already. And really that's projected to impact land values, infrastructure, such as a Pescadero fire station that was mentioned, Pigeon Point Lighthouse. In terms of communities, Martins Beach and Tenitas Creek would be at risk from storm wave flooding, and the town of Pescadero will be even more vulnerable to creek flooding. It's important to note that many of the South Coast residents are Latino farmers who are also part of low-income families. So it's really important that we consider social vulnerability as we develop these solutions and really design them in a way that's inclusive as we think about how we're going to tackle these challenges. In terms of recreational areas, about 15 miles of trails, beach facilities, and culturally significant places in Año Nuevo are all at risk from erosion. Regarding roads at risk, this was mentioned earlier, Highway 1, and that is critical because it's the primary transportation corridor in the South Coast. The study shows that several miles of Highway 1 could be affected by erosion, especially around Bean Hollow, Pescadero Point, and Pomponio Beach. Pescadero Creek Road will be one of the most affected county roads, mostly by estuary flooding. And about 11 parking lots maintained by the state parks are also at risk. In terms of agriculture, there are over 550 acres of potentially vulnerable agricultural land at risk from erosion. And if we think about it, agricultural businesses depend on Highway 1 to access packaging and shipping. So there's a lot of impacts, that limited road access will have on the agricultural sector. So the next phase of the study includes identifying solutions to prepare for sea level rise, analyzing the costs of the different adaptation approaches, and also defining what areas to prioritize. We'll be hosting stakeholder meetings and community conversations to understand the type of adaptation approaches that are appropriate to protect the South Coast. So stay tuned to our website for information on upcoming events. Also want to recognize one of the fabulous staff of the Office of Sustainability, Isabel Perez Ramos, who has led the development of much of this study, and she's on with us tonight, should there be more technical questions. We aim to have the study ready for public review in early 2022. And thank you for your participation in this very important forum, and look forward to hearing your ideas for protecting the South Coast and for building a resilient San Mateo County. On here, this website address, you can actually access that 2018 vulnerability assessment that I mentioned earlier, as well as the South Coast study draft maps that I've just presented on. And that's where you can also get information about opportunities to get engaged. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Calix Nelson with the San Mateo County Resource Conservation District. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you all for having me here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and hear the great work that's going on in San Mateo County to build resilience. I'm going to share my screen. I thought I would start with what is the RCD, because I think unlike some of the other folks here, it's not everybody knows what we are. The Resource Conservation District is a special district in San Mateo County that helps people help the land. And we've been boots on the ground. We're very much on the ground getting work done since 1939. We work across jurisdictions, across public and private land to build resilience at scale in a number of different ways. Our services, we have very diverse tools to address the needs of the community and work at different scales, providing confidential, non-regulatory technical assistance. We, for our focal areas are listed here, and that we do a lot with agriculture, though we're not agricultural producers. We deal with the water supply, water reliability, drought, flooding, water quality, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, habitat enhancement, forest health, fire resilience, all aspects of resilient natural resources in our community. And we provide comprehensive, integrated, holistic services to the communities that we serve for the best management of their natural resources and considering other values such as public safety, economic resilience, et cetera. So I was asked specifically to highlight a project addressing flooding in the town of Pescadero on Pescadero Creek Road that Carolyn just spoke about. We actually have well over 100 resilience projects underway at the moment. And they're at different scales, and some of them are actually in partnership with some of the other presenters tonight. But choosing one of these projects to talk about is like choosing one of your kids. But I'm going to highlight this. What you see is these photos are the main or arguably only in certain circumstances road into town in Pescadero. And it flooded quite regularly. And what happened was that the flooding, that the water would come down from Buteno Creek, and it was actually not an issue of too much water, but an issue of too much sediment. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then also water from the ocean would come in with the tides and form essentially a dam that would make the fresh water back up and flood the road into town. Not only that, but the water quality conditions, it was a complicated system going on, but it was causing an annual die-off of threatened and endangered species like steelhead trout. When flooding from Pescadero Creek also happened, the confluence of those two creeks would happen in downtown Pescadero. So I mentioned that the flooding was, people tend to associate flooding with too much water, but in this case, it was too much sediment in the wrong places, coming from throughout the watershed and the ecosystem, accelerated by human activities. This gully, for example, opened up in one storm, and to give you a sense of scale, that is one person standing at the edge of the gully. And then it all piled up right here under the road, basically. And that is Pescadero Marsh. So when all of that sediment piled up here, you can see that the creek, just about where my cursor is, ceased to exist. And so when the water came down that watershed, it would back up. It was causing difficulties. You can see this farm field is impacted by flooding, even though this is a very dry day. You can see that the CAL FIRE station that was here that provides emergency response is across from the community, separated by the flooding. And so what is the kind of thing that we would do about something like this? Our solution had multiple components to provide holistic resilience. One was dredging to reestablish the creek for water to go through and not cause flooding, and also incidentally for fish to be able to migrate up the stream so that endangered cohoed salmon and steelhead trout had access to an entire watershed that had been blocked for many years. And then, so here's that sediment removal area, about 1.5 miles of where dredging took place. And then we beneficially reused that sediment on site to address the water quality issues that caused the fish die-offs. And then overall, our approach is to build soil health throughout the watershed, prevent erosion, prevent the problem whenever it happens. In this case, you can see where we worked with partners to repair the erosion. So prevent erosion, build soil health, manage erosion when it does happen, and then throughout the watershed, give sediment and water places to go. This is an example. Oh, looks like it's not going to work. I don't see it working. This was a time-lapse video, basically showing how we reconnected a floodplain to allow water to spill out and sediment to drop out at key places throughout the watershed, essentially to take pressure off the system. A lot of our work just looks like nature. We are actually installing wood in creeks, which restores habitat, but also stores sediment, slows water down, etc. And I'm going to just say, leave it at this message that these things need to happen at scale in myriad ways to build resilience. It's not just building a wall or that sort of thing. As you're hearing from partners, there's a lot of different solutions. And with that, I am going to leave this if anybody wants to take a screenshot of it, and I'm going to pass the mic to Margie Gator with the League of Women Voters. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Kelix. Good evening, everybody. I'm Margie Gator from the League of Women Voters of North and Central San Mateo County, and I have the pleasure of moderating this forum. I'd like to thank my colleague, Kathy Wheeler, and I have a couple of related questions on the Harbor District, on the jetty at the Harbor District. How long do you expect, so I guess this is for Jim Pruett, how long do you moved sand to stay there at Surfers Beach? Oh, and if all the panelists could put on their cameras, please, for the questions. I was asked to do that reminder. So all the panelists, please turn on your cameras. Thank you. And then unmute if the question comes to you or if you think of something to chime in. Jim, how long do you expect the move stand to stay at Surfers Beach? And related, if the root cause of the sand erosion at Surfers Beach is the jetty, is something going to be modified, or is there a consideration of removing the jetty, or what to do about that? So how long will the fix look?
That is a fantastic question, and thank you. There were considerations of putting a hole in the jetty to let the sand escape through that hole, but for various reasons that option was turned down or not brought forward. So what right now is the plan is to mechanically move the sand that washes into the west side of the harbor over to because it naturally flows over to the south side of the harbor and mechanically move it onto Surfers Beach. How long the sand will stay there, that's the miracle of engineering and how they build the berms and how far it goes out. And that's what we want to see when we first do this project, is once we put the sand in place based on the engineering studies, how long it will stand. And that's part of the CDP, is to monitor that. But I don't see this as a one-time thing. I think we're moving towards, if this works properly or works out well, towards a system similar to the harbor in Santa Cruz, where they have a dredge that continually pumps during dredging season, pumps sand to a manifold. And then that uses that manifold to direct the sand to the beach and where it's needed most, to continue to rebuild the berms or put a sand beach out there. So how long it would last? Great question. We need to find that out by actually doing it, and then continue to work on it, on how to keep it there.
Great. And how about the jetty? Any modifications needed there, or?
Yeah, the modifications they were considering is breaking it off at the shoreline so the sand would move through. But there were several reasons that wasn't considered as a solution. And sand flow was one of them. You can't force the sand through an opening. The currents don't necessarily push them through that opening. But the dredging is a much better option in our opinion, because we're able to move a lot more sand into specific areas that need it versus just the flowing through the jetty itself.
Great, thank you. And this next question, I'm not sure who it goes to, maybe Carolyn, Kellex, and Isabel, who's joined us for the Q&A. A resident of Moss Beach who lives in Seal Cove asks, my neighborhood is west of Highway 1. There is no real drainage runoff for runoff flows. Is there a plan to install proper drainage so the bluffs won't erode from the top?
I don't know. I could look into that. That might be more of a public works question. I don't have an answer to that though. Isabel, do you have any knowledge of that?
I was just thinking that was more related to public works as well.
Okay.
So if you'll be capturing, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to offer that there's also things that individuals can do on their own private properties to slow, sink, store water, with not only rainwater harvesting and stormwater gardening and that sort of thing. That's not mutually exclusive of public works projects, but just, I think that a lot of times it takes a village.
Got it.
If there's a name or we could capture an email, I could follow up on that.
Okay, if the questioner would like to send that over to Carolyn, she'd be happy to follow up. Thanks. Another question is, the coast side has become the backyard for the rest of the country, like during the pandemic. Coastside communities can't be expected to fund all of these projects when its infrastructure is used to the max by the entire county. Where's the money going to come from, and who's responsible for these projects? Well, kind of everybody, but it's basically about funding. Maybe Len?
Sure. I mean, I can start. As Kellex said, with dealing with water related issues on property, it does take a village, and we're looking at as I mentioned, we're looking at a long-term sustainable source of funds for climate resilience, both on the water side and the wildfire side, and that would be part of the equation. Certainly, funding from the local jurisdictions would be a part. And then there's a lot more funding in the state level now than there was even a few weeks ago, and this is in the new state budget that was signed in September. And then we'll wait and see what comes out of the federal government related to climate resilience work. So I think it's going to be a combination of funding sources, and certainly in terms of kind of who would take the lead on those projects. I think you're looking at some of the entities here, obviously the Harbor District, the cities, OneShoreline, the county, and the RCD will have a hand in these projects. And And so it's on all of us to kind of figure out how that pie gets created, that funding pie.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on that? All right. Ryan Marquez, I have a question for you about the Pacifica Pier. It wasn't mentioned that the lifespan of the seawall project in Pacifica, which is only 50 years, the project engineer with GHD said this project would not solve Pacifica's problems, only buy us time. Should we not also be looking at longer term solutions to build true resilience? The city council would not allow the consultant to consider managed retreat. Is a study of managed retreat not a requirement of Coastal Commission approval that will be eventually needed?
Thanks for that question, Margie. So the project that I presented, the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project, did look at the area for a 50-year lifespan. It's quite a common lifespan for infrastructure on the coast. To look at that lifespan, as well as the materials we were looking at using for the different alternatives, tend to degrade over that lifespan. And just because infrastructure is put in place and has a 50-year design life doesn't mean it can't have a useful life for longer. I believe the city is looking at longer term solutions. The city has gone through adaptation plans as well as planning for the local coastal land use plans, and through that have decided that it would be looked at, the adaptation plans would be revisited every 5 years with the best available science. And so in that manner, long-term sustainability and long-term look can be continually monitored as we get more science on the matter. I think the last question was around managed retreat, and the project did look at a no project alternative, which is very similar to managed retreat. And so a lot of the data and the costs and what it would look like are right there within the no project alternative. And that will have to be analyzed as part of Coastal Commission approval process.
Okay, great. Len, I have another question for you. This person understands some protection of existing development in the short term. However, why lock in new development in high-risk areas? This seems contrary to best practices, CCC guidance, and reduction of long-term economic environmental costs.
Yeah, I didn't say that we were in favor of locking in new development in high-risk areas. What I said was where new development is moving forward, that what we want to do is we want to plan it and design it in a way such that it is resilient. And so, we're not advocating for putting things in risky areas, but I think that we acknowledge that the cities are there, that in certain areas, in most areas where new development comes in, it's redevelopment. It's not development going into open space or marshes, thankfully. And so when redevelopment happens, let's do it intelligently and take into account future conditions.
Great, thank you. And I just have a couple more questions. We might run a teeny bit over, but I think this is such a good topic. I think that will be okay. Not sure who this goes to, so hopefully someone will jump in. While land use may be a local decision, doesn't the flood district have a responsibility to prioritize less damaging and more environmentally sound solutions over hard armoring solutions, and to encourage options that are compatible with CCC guidance?
Well, I could start on that, and I think others probably could augment. So as part of the approval process for environmental permitting, we and all agencies are required to do an examination and make a case that the project being proposed is the least environmentally damaging practical alternative. And I think it sounds similar to the question, and so I think the questioner is aware of that. And that would be one of the alternatives that we're looking at. And all of those words are key: least damaging environmentally, and also practical. And so organizations have to balance all those factors in putting forward projects that in the best interests of their communities and the county as a whole in some ways. So that's certainly what we would be working on. And I think that all agencies, whether it's the cities or the harbor district or us or the RCD or the county on the coast side, would take that into account and would have to explain that to the environmental agencies.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll jump in a little bit on it. I think that everybody on this call probably understands where the Coastal Commission lands on this, and their policy guidance is pretty clear that their emphasis for anything post Coastal Act adoption, armoring is the least desirable choice, and should be looked at as the last option. But I will say this, take, for example, Seymour Ditch, which I had some pictures of. This is basically a man-made ditch that was created many years ago as part of agriculture. It's a 90-degree turn and comes in, and it's incised from what was just a 5-foot wide ditch, 20 years ago, to a 50, 80-foot wide opening and equally deep. And we are challenged with finding solutions to deal with that. The compounding issue there is this happens to be incising near a county closed landfill that's between our parking lot at Poplar and the Seymour Ditch. So there are, I think, extenuating circumstances and projects that do require some hard engineering to protect the environment and protect the assets and benefit the community that we're going to have to be able to look at. And the challenge we're having with a lot of grant applications and grant projects out there is that no one wants to fund anything that looks like hard engineering. Yet we're struggling with that, and it's the last thing we want to do. But we have looked at at the various options and everything. So what I want to say is that we all know where we all want to be and where the Coastal Commission wants to be, but there has to be some place for some hard engineering and armoring in certain circumstances, and we're just hopeful that we can get to that point and clarify that.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll do 2 more questions because I just got a new one. How will the adoption of SB 9 and SB 10 affect at-risk communities? How will the adoption of SB 9 and SB 10 affect at-risk communities?
Gee, everybody's jumping into that. I think the answer is no one knows. Obviously, with the language of, I'll speak to SB 9 in particular, it's the one I'm most familiar with and read. It will allow property owners to split their property with very little to no review and normal processes and procedures, which means that we will intensify and densify areas that are in potential hazard areas. I know there's provisions for looking at those issues, but the straight read of it is that it will increase density. And if you haven't read it, it's also that you can create basically 2 duplexes on 1 parcel of land or 2 parcels of land and create that. So it's inevitably going to increase densities in some areas, which may not be the most desired outcome from an environmental and sea level rise perspective. I think that's just the reality of that.
Thank you. And then my last question is for Chris Hunter, and Carolyn, jump in also if you have any input. The majority of San Mateo County shoreline is unincorporated county area. What do you see as the county's top 3 priorities to achieve resilience to sea level rise and major storms? What are the top 3 priorities?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'd just like to say that most of the county coastline is not inhabited. Most of the inhabitations are in Pacifica, and even the city of Half Moon Bay is off of the coastline. The things I mentioned before about protecting the commercial and residential areas that do exist seems to be a sort of a uniform goal. The other thing that needs to be protected, I guess the number one for the county is transportation and maintaining and protecting Highway 1 as long as it's possible. I wanted to mention that the biggest erosion project in the history of San Mateo was the Tom Lantos tunnels, $500 million project to keep that highway from falling into the ocean. And that's been pretty successful. And because of that, more people feel comfortable going to the coast side. And so protection of transportation and as much as possible, protecting commercial and residential existence while it's possible. Carolyn?
Yeah, to add to that, certainly Highway 1, obviously there's significant economic impacts to consider. And then I would also add to that, that communities that are impacted, sort of like the Pescadero area. I mean, there's we're already seeing the impacts of sea level rise and flooding. So part of this assessment that we're looking at, and then the one in 2018 is to do a prioritization, start really identifying projects, looking for funding sources, and kind of, laying that path forward in partnership with the communities. And I don't know, Isabel, did you want to add anything there? I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Basically echoing what you just said, that for us it's really important to really understand what the community also wants to prioritize based on their values, based on what's important for them. And that's going to be part of the prioritization process when developing adaptation solutions.
Margie, if I could just add that I would add to that list our natural areas on the coast and our state beaches. That those are obvious to all of us. They're tremendous assets. And we started a conversation with the state park system, which runs the state beaches. And as somebody mentioned previously, I think it might have been Vice Mayor Ruddock, that the state beaches are, there's several of them. They're a huge asset to the coast side. And it's in our interest that we work to protect those as well. So I would add that to the list.
Great, thank you very much. And that concludes the question portion of our forum. And I would like to turn it to Margaret Lukens of the League with final thoughts and thank yous.
Thank you, Margie. Please join me in thanking the following people who made tonight's presentation possible. Debbie Ruddock, Half Moon Bay Vice Mayor and OneShoreline Board Vice Chair. Chris Hunter, Chief of Staff for San Mateo County Supervisor Don Horsley's office. Len Materman, CEO of OneShoreline. Ryan Marquez, Associate Civil Engineer of the City of Pacifica. Jim Pruett, the General Manager, San Mateo County Harbor District. John Doughty, Public Works Director, City of Half Moon Bay. Carolyn Bloede, Director of San Mateo County Office of Sustainability. Kellex Nelson, the Executive Director of San Mateo Resource Conservation District, and Margie Gator, League of Women Voters of North and Central San Mateo County, who facilitated our question and answer period. In addition to the presenters, I'd like to thank Isabel Perez Ramos, the Resource Conservation Specialist for the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability, for her availability to answer our questions. If you'd like to view tonight's presentation again or share it with others, it will be available to you to view in both English and Spanish on YouTube. The recording link can be found on OneShoreline and also on our website. It will be available next week. If you appreciate the education that you've gotten here tonight, and I know I certainly do, and you'd like to be a part of offering programs like these in our community, we'd invite you to join the League of Women Voters. We are always happy to welcome more of our fellow county residents to join us in our mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. Just visit our website or use the email that's posted in the chat. That's lwvncsmc@sbcglobal.net. Finally, if questions come to your mind that you wished you had asked, send them on to oneshoreline.org LWV-forums. And OneShoreline will be happy to address your questions in the future. So with that, thank you very much for joining us, and good night.